the next one, what? Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some fantasy book recommendations for non-fantasy readers. So I've just accepted the fact that this is my new filming space because this is the only time and place that I can film at the current moment. So I have all those lovely bookshelves, and this is the background you're going to see for probably the foreseeable future. Either way, I'm here because we are well in the fall season, as you can tell. I'm bringing out my new favorite shirt. And when it comes to fall reading, for me personally, I like the thrillers and the mysteries, but I also like some good fantasy books, especially some like darker fantasy books. So I thought, what better way to do recommendations of books that include fantasy, not necessarily the dark fall aesthetic, but just like include fantasy for people who maybe won't be wanting to get into fantasy. I don't have a lot. I've only got about 7 book series here to recommend you because I didn't want to go too heavy into the fantasy world. I just wanted to do some with like a touch of fantasy. So with that being said, let's just dive right in. All right, the first 2 I'm gonna do first because I don't own them, and if I don't do them first, I'm gonna forget about them. Let's be honest. The first one I think is the only middle grade I have on this list. So if you are a middle grade fan, I would be surprised if you're a middle grade fan and you don't like fantasy, because a lot of middle grade is fantasy. Not all, but a lot. Either way, this one is called All the Impossible Things by Lindsay Lackey. I read this last year when I did that video of like books recommended by you guys, and I did like 1 per month basically. And so this is one that's like a magical realism-esque book. So follow our main character Red as she navigates the foster care system, and it's really about her finding these new foster parents, and her mother is in jail, and so she has always been under the impression that her mother's going to come back and get her, and so then she like is dealing with being in the foster system because her mother's in jail, and just like a lot of stuff with that. Her mother not being the best person. Her grandmother, I think, if I remember the story, was like someone who was really important to her, and then passed away. So she's kind of been bounced from like family to family, and like she's had some really not great situations, and she finally gets sent to this couple. And so like it's little things like she doesn't unpack because, at least at first, because like in the past little things would set this family off. She does one thing wrong and she immediately goes up to her room and packs her stuff, and then the foster mother comes in and is like, what are you doing? And like they talk about it, and like there's just like little things of like unlearning trauma for her. But she's got a lot of big emotions, and those emotions manifest in weather. So you've got this very contemporary feeling written story, where like honestly anyone from any age can enjoy this, even if you're not like a big middle grade person. I just really liked the story, but like these feelings as they're built up throughout the story, they really kind of, like I said, manifest in this like weather. And like when she's upset, it rains a lot and there's storms, and like as she's building up these like feelings throughout the book, these like really intense feelings, they kind of like manifest in this like cyclone of sorts. So it is written in a way that it has fantastical elements, but it feels realistic and grounded in this world. So that's why I think it would be a good book if you're trying to figure out fantasy, because anything like with magical realism I think is probably a good first step into fantasy, because it's usually written and grounded in reality with fantastical elements in it. But the way this was written was very much like, this feels like it could happen, and also feels like this is just a coincidence maybe at times, until we get to the end. So that's why I like this one a lot. It was just very well done. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. Like it was, nope, I gave it 5 right there. So I loved it. The next one's a little strange for me to be adding because I gave it 3 stars and it is the first in a duology and I'm not planning on continuing. But the way it's written, I think, is very well done if you are someone who wants to get into fantasy, specifically in the dragon realm. So this is the Blaze Wrath Games by Amparo Ortiz. This one is written very contemporarily. It's about this girl who takes place in these games called the Blaze Wrath Games, where there's dragons. And it's very much presented like the Olympics, where there's like a bunch of different countries competing against each other. Now it's just one singular game, and it's like a group. It's kind of like, the best way that I can describe it is like Quidditch from Harry Potter, where it's like a team and each person on the team has a different like purpose, but they ride dragons and it's like different people do different things. And so she's in this team for Puerto Rico, and she was her father is Puerto Rican and her mother is American, or vice versa. I can't remember which one. I think her father's Puerto Rican, and so she lives in America, but she is accepted by the Puerto Rican team. And so there's a lot of conversation about whether or not she can actually compete in the Puerto Rican team because like she's American, like all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot about culture in it as well. And there's also other people on this team who are from multiple countries or have multiple cultures. So that's a very interesting conversation, but it's very much written like a YA contemporary is the best way that I can describe it. But like they're competing in these games and they're competing against different cultures and different countries, and there is this underlying like bad guy that's around, and there's a little bit more of a more centralized political plot and political issue on whether or not the dragon rights is the best way that I can describe it. But it's just like it's very fantastical when you think about it because it's about dragons. Dragons are a huge part of the plot, but it's written in a way that feels just like the other book, like grounded in reality. So it's very strange the way it was written. So sometimes that can take you out of it if you're expecting one thing, but if you go in knowing it's going to be written very contemporarily, like a contemporary like YA romance kind of vibe, like from high school is the best that I can describe it. But there are dragons. There are other magical creatures, like our main character's best friend is a witch, so there is some other elements to it as well, but like this is definitely, I don't know, it's just the way that it was written was very much like, this makes sense. The next one is an unfinished trilogy, but I've read the 2 that are out, and the 3rd one is coming out next year sometime. So you can catch up if the next one comes out. And that is the Monster Trilogy by Vanessa Lynn, the first one being Only a Monster and the sequel being Never a Hero. I would say the first one specifically, this one kind of takes a little bit more of a fantastical twist to it, but once you've read the first one, I think you're engrossed enough in the world that like you'll want the second one. But this one feels the best for someone just starting out fantasy. So this follows our main character Joan. She's 16 and she's spending the summer in London. Her mother's side of the family, her mother passed away when she was younger, and her mother's side of the family is very eccentric and lives in London, and her dad is, I believe, American. And she is sent to live with her mom's side of the family for the summer, and she's working in this historical house with this guy named Nick that she has a huge crush on. And then one day something happens and she discovers and is told by her mom's side of the family that she is half human, half monster. And in this world, monsters aren't like what you're thinking, like physical creatures. They just have this ability to be able to time travel. But in order to time travel, they have to steal however much they want to travel, a day, a year, a week, you know, whatever it is, whatever time they want to travel in the future or in the past, they have to steal that time off of a human's life, which makes them the monster. And then each family has another special ability on top of that. So she discovers this and then finds out that Nick, the guy that she's had a crush on, that like they've literally just had a date and like she is loving it, is a monster hunter. And so a lot happens, and then she ends up teaming up with this guy named Aaron, who's from a rival monster family, as they're trying, and her cousin, as they're trying to run away from Nick. And it travels in the past to like the 90s a little bit. So I say, if you are a fan of like, this is not if you're like a non-fantasy, but like if you are a fan of like Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instrument series, especially the first book, I think you'd like this. But because yes, there's this fantastical element of like time travel, which is really interesting, because of how little they time travel in the first book, I think this is a good test to see if you are a fantasy reader, because like yes, this one has significantly more fantastical elements than the last two books that I mentioned. We're starting to move more into like the fantasy, more fantasy, but once they time travel, it's like they stay there for like the entirety of the book pretty much, and they are just trying to figure out what's going on. And there's like a little bit of a mystery element to the story as well. So this one also ends, I said this before, if you are satisfied with the first book, you can kind of stop there. There's an epilogue that kind of like leans towards possibility of stuff in the future, but just how this book ends, you can be content with it. This one, not so much. This has a cliffhanger, and I need the third book right away. But like this one, like I said, has significantly more fantastical elements. But once you read the first one, you're kind of engrossed in that world. And if you like the world, then like the fact that this is really fantastical doesn't, I think, won't bother you. But I think just the way like it's described is more maybe scientific than fantastical. I just really love the series, and I think that this is a good one if you are trying to figure out if fantasy is your thing. Also, any excuse to talk about the series because I love it so much. So there you go. The next one is a duology, and they're both out, so you could read them. And that is the love story duology Anatomy and Immortality by Dana Schwartz. This is for my, well, the next few actually are for my historical people who are wanting to get into fantasy from a historical standpoint. These both take place in Edinburgh. The first one takes place in, it's not going to give me a time, is it? Well, that's unfortunate. Oh, here we go. 1817. That's when the book starts. So this book series, at least the first one, follows our main character Hazel, and she wants to be part of the Royal Edinburgh's Anatomist Society. However, it's the 1800s, and she is a female, so that's a no-go. But she ends up kind of, due to some events, she ends up in a meeting with the guy who's running the Anatomist Society, and he's like, I think that you can definitely be part of the society. I will happily let you take the test if you want, but you can't come to the classes to learn everything, so you got to figure that out on your own. But you're welcome to come take the test. And she's like, okay. So she teams up with this guy named Jack, who's a grave robber, and he digs up bodies and sells them to the Anatomy Society and doctors who are using these bodies to study anatomy. And so she enlists his help to find some bodies so that she can start studying things, so she can take the exam and pass. And then it's very medical and historical. And then at the very, very end, there's like a Frankenstein, fantastical, scientific-esque twist to the story. So this one specifically is very historical. I will say, if you're squeamish, don't read the series. I'm very squeamish, and like there were moments that I was like, this is a little much for me, just because like she's literally opening bodies to study them. So it's very medical. It's not like descriptive, I don't think, and it's like grossness, but like it's gonna tell you, scientifically speaking, what she's doing. So this book is very historical with a very last minute twist to fantasy. This one, again, very historical, takes place a year after the events of the first book. And it has a little bit more of a fantastical twist just because the thing that's mentioned in this book plays a pretty big role in this one. And so while it still has the vein and still has the vibe of a historical medical story, this was a little bit more fantastical. Again, I don't think it's that fantastical in the grand scheme of things. It's, again, more scientific than fantastical, which I think is why it would work for people who are starting to like discover fantasy, because the way the fantastical elements are described are very rooted in science to the point that I believe this could be a thing, I guess is the way I can describe it. So this is Hazel's journey, as she is called by King George III for his daughter, Princess Charlotte, who's really, really sickly. Sorry, granddaughter, who's really, really sickly. And Hazel has gotten some acclaim after the events of the first book. And so he's like, look, I've tried everything else. Come see if you can fix her and why she's sickly. And so this one is more of like, this one takes place in London, if I am correct, and is more like court intrigue a little bit, but still has that fantastical element. So these are very loose in their fantastic element. This one might be a little bit more science fiction than fantasy, but I think these are really good, and the YA-ness of it is fantastic, and I highly recommend these as well. The next two also are in the same vein of like, if you are a historical fiction fan, you would like these. This one is probably no surprise to people, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I have not read the sequel yet, so I feel like based on how this book went, the sequel is going to have significantly more fantastical elements in it, but this is for historical fiction fans for sure. It takes place during like, it feels like a World War II situation, but it's these two rival journalists who are competing for the same position on the paper, which is a reporter from the front line, I believe is how they do it. I don't remember exactly how they did it. A columnist position, but they end up both taking a job as reporters on the front line of this war, and the war is between two gods, and they have enlisted humans. So like the god element of it is very minor. It's just like you learn about the history, but it feels very much like Greek mythology in the sense of there's a god and there's supposed to be gods, but it's more of like the historical nature of why the war started, I guess. But these two are just being kind of reporters on the front line. And it's a romance between the two of them. They're rivals. They basically are writing letters to each other, and one of them knows it's who it is, and the other one does not. And so you got that as well. But like the romantic elements were so much fun, and I really, really enjoyed the story. I went in knowing this was very historical, and there wasn't a lot of fantasy, whereas a lot of people went in thinking there was a lot of fantasy and were disappointed. So this is a great book. Like, this is probably the best recommendation on this list if you are a historical fan wanting to get into fantasy, because the fantastical elements are so minor. Again, I think the sequel is going to have more. Can't speak on if it actually does or not, but just based on how this ends, I feel like the sequel is going to have some more fantastical elements. So this is a good start, and then if you get involved with the characters and you love them and you want to know more, then the second one would be a really good test of like fantastical nature. But I loved it. I loved it so much. This is my Fairy Loot edition, and it's beautiful. Next one is for my, again, historical, but for people who like Regency England, Jane Austen, Regency romances, things of that historical romance. Let's start there. And that is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a book about fairies. So it is fantastical, but it's set and rooted in Regency England. A lot of the like social norms and everything you would expect from like a historical Regency romance, but with the addedness that there are fairies. And like they may not really be in society, but like people know they exist and talk about them. And so our main character, Theodora, when she was really young, somehow bartered half of her soul away to a fae. And so she literally has half a soul, which means that she has no sense of fear, embarrassment, or even happiness, and a condition which makes her sadly prone to accidental scandal. And so it's her goal for the season to like help her cousin get a match. And so she ends up making friends with this guy named Lord Elias Wilder, who is the Lord Sorcerer of England. And so he's like kind of the same. She's very awkward. She doesn't really understand social cues because of the fact that she doesn't have half a soul. And so he basically, they strike up a bargain, and he like helps her out. There's more in the series, but I've only read this one, and I don't think they're like connected in the sense of like they all just take place in the same world. I don't think they're connected. Like it's the same characters. There is a prequel that follows Elias, but otherwise I'm pretty sure they're different stories. But it's their romance as they figure out her soul. And so there are some fantastical elements, obviously, because there's fae. There's some like magical items, like they end up being able to speak to each other through a mirror. And so you've got that. And then at the end, they do kind of step into the fae world a little bit, which is very fantastical. But it has like, it's very rooted in that Regency social culture norms vibe. And like, even though there is fantastical elements and stuff like that and fantastical creatures, it's still the same thing with like women not being equal to men and people needing to get married and like what we would expect from society and things like that. So I really enjoyed it. It's also written very much like a Jane Austen story. So I just really liked it. And one of you guys is the one who put it on my radar. This says Pride and Prejudice meets Howl's Moving Castle on the back here. I definitely feel it's like Pride and Prejudice meets insert any fae romance here. So I very much enjoy that one. And that's it. That is a look at all of the books, at least at the moment, that I can think of that I think would be good for people who are just starting out in fantasy. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. Let me know down below if you have some other recommendations. Tell each other recommendations for people who are just figuring out fantasy, or maybe some magical realism recommendations. Whatever you think I should have added to this list, let me know your thoughts down below. Or if you, of course, have read any of the books in this video, I'd love to know your thoughts on those as well. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links. So go check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!